ago today, a band called Fishmans performed at Akasaka Blitz in Tokyo. 9 months later, it was released as December 28, 1998, Otakatachi no Wakare, roughly translated to A Man's Farewell, which, to those who know about it, is commonly considered the greatest live album of all time. I'm here today to tell you why that is, and in the process cover the 4 studio albums leading up to it. The reason being is that those are the 4 that I'd have listened to. Before we get to Orange, real quick, I want to give a synopsis on who exactly the Fishmans are. The members include, in addition to the lead singer Shinji Sato, who also did a lot of the songwriting. They formed in 1987 in Japan and started making albums in 1991. And leading up to their 4th record, Orange, Kensuke Ojima had left. Orange came out in 1994, and it was a real turning point for the band. It was the last LP of theirs which I would consider mostly dub music. Dub music is kind of a blend between reggae, funk, indie rock, and pop, which may have been a trend in early 90s Japan. It's hard to say whether it was a big thing or not, because I was not in Japan, nor was I live during this time, and it's hard to find sources on this since I don't speak Japanese. But nonetheless, Orange is without a doubt the most upbeat and positive Fishmans album I've heard. It clocks in at exactly 40 minutes, with a short 20-second intro leading directly into the first song, KIBUN, that features an incredibly catchy refrain. My Life is definitely the poppiest cut here, although I noticed this, it doesn't have a bass line, kind of leaves the track feeling unbalanced. Even so, the keyboard on this track is lovely and bounces off the rest of the sounds. The triumphant, heavily syncopated melody seems like it's practically begging to be put at the end credits of some movie. It just screams happy ending. Not literally, of course. The singing is normal. Sato does not scream a single time, but I'm sure if he did, he would bring down the entire building. I haven't had a chance to mention it before, but Shinji Sato has quite the upper register, which leads to a lot of his vocals on tracks taking on a kind of childlike demeanor. The much less dense sounds on the following YURAMEKI leave Sato's singing fairly exposed and vulnerable, especially during the final seconds of that song, where the instruments cut out, leaving his voice wavering and pretty meek. The second half of this record does sound more sparse, save for Kansha Odoroki, one of the more dynamic cuts on the record, featuring a variety of percussion and keyboards throughout. This was the third Fishman CD I've 13 months after the release of Orange, Fishmans dropped the single Night Cruising, which is almost certainly their most iconic song. Or at least most iconic that's not over 30 minutes. Don't worry, we'll get to that soon. Night Cruising sounds a lot like what they were going for on Orange, but with a more melancholic twist, giving the song more of an emotional bite. I'm going to come back to the song once we get to Otakatachi no Wakare, but just know it is 6 minutes of pure bliss. February of 1996, Kuchu Camp was released, clocking in at 46 minutes and 8 songs. It starts with ZUTTO Zen and makes its first impression with these washed-out, distant guitars. They almost sound sun-bleached. They certainly set the tone for a more mellow listen than Orange, making for a pretty immersive atmosphere that would make a consistent appearance from this point onwards. The next song, Baby Blue, is another laid-back cut. It has the syncopation dub music is known for, but in general it sounds very restrained, until the strings come in on one of the choruses. The best thing about it is the variety of sounds. On Subarashiku Nice Choice, it starts with this 30-second English sample of a kid talking about his pretty scrappy daily routine, how he's gonna rob people and do drugs, all over these really desolate arpeggiating synths. Really sinister way to lead off a song. Sato's crooning on this track sounds very dark. It's probably the most cynical Fishman song I've heard. Kuchu Camp is not nearly as immediately memorable as most of the stuff on Orange, but it makes up for it by having this insane level of imagery woven into the sounds. It makes me think of an overly introspective day at the beach. I know that sounds specific, but I mean I live in Florida, so I have a lot of experience with days at the beach, introspective or otherwise. I would put Kuchu Camp and Orange on the same level quality-wise. 1996 proved to be quite the prolific year for the Fishmans, as they would release 2 studio albums within a mere 8 months from each other. In September, the promotional single Season was released, which I will get back to once I cover the album it derives itself from. 1 month later, Long Season was released. Now, the weird thing about Long Season is that it is one solitary song that just so happens to be 35 minutes long. Now, certain versions of it have the song split up into 5 parts, and though that is the version easiest to find online, the original issue, as well as the remastered version I own on CD, is a single 35-minute and 16-second track. And it isn't just a gimmick, it is a singular experience through and through. I dare say it's the most cohesive album I've ever heard. It's ambitious, and it is a huge departure from their previous works. It seems on this project they've completely transcended their dub roots, save for that funky, fresh bass line. I would categorize it as progressive pop, which before this I did not know was an actual genre, but I mean, it fits perfectly. This record is a journey in the truest sense. It starts with a bass line and some scarce water splashing noises, then the guitar comes in. There's some subtle chimes, and then slowly but surely it builds to the main backbone of the entire LP, 4 descending notes on a keyboard. The basic structure for the bulk of the runtime is a series of different passages, an electric guitar solo, a verse or two from Sato, an accordion part. There's this one part with the least creepy choir of children I've heard in music. My interpretation is that each part represents a sight you see, or a person you meet on the way to wherever this album is taking you. You may travel with someone for a while, then have to suddenly depart. You may encounter passerbys that you never see again. There's this part where this super fast and loud drum line overtakes the entire song and dissolves all of the other instruments playing. After that is the only time within the song that it stops for a sec, only to begin regrouping a moment later. Forgive me if I sound a bit corny about this record, but this is pretty life-changing stuff. My mind was just about blown on first listen. This was my first Fishmans album. I heard it back in very early August in preparation for a radio show about obscure albums. I first discovered it through rateyourmusic.com, as I'm sure many others have as well. This was actually days before it and most of their discography was put up for streaming on Spotify. Coincidence? Definitely not. They were tuned into 91.5 WPRK FM radio on August 6th at about 8:15 a.m. to hear me gush about this album, and they thought, wow, Miller likes it, that means we have to get it up for streaming. That's exactly what happened. This was also the first Fishmans CD I got. Going back to the song Season, however, reveals a good bit about that song's status in the Fishmans ethos. The main thing it shares with its album counterpart are all of Shinji Sato's verses. All of those, however, are put in a totally different context. The instrumental is so darn lush. It's composed of all acoustic guitar, string orchestra, and a few others. Pretty distinct sound from any other Fishmans endeavor, including Long Season itself. It's content. Unlike the album, it doesn't really have anything it has to build up to. Season is certainly a masterpiece in its own right. There were 8 months between Kuchu Camp and Long Season. Between Long Season and their next album, Uchu ni Ponsetagaya, there were another 9 months. That's insanity. It's crazy to think that they released 2 back-to-back masterpieces in that span of time. Uchu ni Ponsetagaya is also, pretty importantly, their final studio album, and I'd say the definitive one for certain. Of course, I would never be able to decide if this is better than Long Season, but I do think that this is the best traditional album experience they've put out. It's also the longest by far, by a decent margin, at 62 minutes, a long shot from the 35 of their previous project. On the contrary though, this LP is packed with many different sounds they shot for previously, except more streamlined and refined. The best instance of this, I would say, is on Walk in the Rhythm, which, in its 13-minute runtime, manages to take much of what was special about Long Season, the meandering progression, the off-kilter detours, and compress it into just a fraction of the time. There are a few tracks like this. Take the closer, Daydream, and the trip-hop-influenced Weather Report. Now, not all of the tracks are 7.5-minute plus adventures like those. Most of the reggae on this album is confined to the inexplicable magic love. My only real gripe with the track is its goofiness, which in my view breaks the immersion that the record had been constructing so far. However, ZUTTO's spirited singing makes up for it. Still, I'll never find the transition from In the Flight to Magic Love not jarring. Speaking of In the Flight, holy crap, that is melancholy if I've ever heard it. The comforting guitars on the falsetto on the chorus is really something. I also love the crunch percussion before the second verse. I'm always impressed by the subtlety here, especially considering how little of it they would use on the following song, as much as I enjoy that. Going back to Kuchu Camp, I think at certain points that album does sound a bit flatly produced, but on Uchu Nippon Setagaya, it seems Fishmans took every opportunity to craft these captivating soundscapes. Take POKKA, and its almost aquatic keyboards that open the whole album. I think it's worth returning to the final cut on here, Daydream, so I can talk about how heavenly the whole thing gets at the very end, dagnabbit, what with its shimmering whatchamacallits and ZUTTO's ever-ethereal croons. How dreamy. This was the second CD I got, yet again from Amazon, for who cares how much. Now that I have covered all Fishman's studio albums in my collection, it's time to go back to where we started. December 28th, 1998, Otakatachi no Wakare. But the months leading up to this performance do have a few details I'll talk about. They had a recording sessions album release in August of 98, who cares, but the real last significant release was YURAMEKI in the Air, a 13.5-minute cut released early December of 1998. Once again, I'm unable to find too much regarding the exact context, but I think it was either a promotional single for an unannounced upcoming album, or more likely a tribute to their imminently departing bassist, Yuzuru Kashiwabara, who throughout the years had contributed countless bouncy, funky, energetic basslines to the band's efforts. Though I've done this for almost no other Fishman song, looking into the lyrics courtesy of a pastebin translation you can find in the description, they are somber. I'll read a couple lines to explain what I mean. I'll double back to this track's live version after I start on Otakatachi no Wakare. Speaking of which, we should start doing that! The Fishmans' performance on December 28, 1998 was set to be their final performance with Kashiwabara, the previously mentioned bassist of the band, who had accompanied them throughout every album. One of the many strange things about this concert is the fact that these aren't all previously released songs. The opener, Oh Slime, and Thank You are new. Oh Slime, as far as I can tell, is a blend between both of their previous live album openers, that being Oh Crime from Oh Mountain and Oh Slime from the one they did right before this. Most of this track's worth for me is the role it serves, kind of a loose, free-form introduction for all the personnel on stage, including Hanzi, frequent collaborator who I've neglected to talk about. She played keyboard on stage. I don't think the track is as strong on repeated listens, but it does pick up at the very end. There are a few more instruments added on to take the strain off of the 2 guitar chords that repeat throughout the entire 8-minute song. The other song I said was new was Thank You, one of the couple reggae cuts on the record, although I think it is less out of place than Magic Love from their last album. Still retains some of the quirkiness without being irreverent, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Their pronunciation of Thank You is pretty silly. Outside of those two, the tracks they perform range from their entire studio discography. Every album has at least one track present. Obviously, this isn't simply a playlist of those songs. The thing that makes this most special is without a doubt Shinji Sato's vocal performances. An instant standout because of it is Night Cruising, and the incredible high notes he goes for on the final bridge of the song. It's enchanting, passionate, and you can tell that they pulled out all of the stops. Due to the live environment, there's a lot of reverb in the recordings, but nonetheless they are extremely high quality. Everything is clear, crisp, warm. I'd say a few tracks benefited from that aspect alone. Take In the Flight. Comparing it to the original, the guitars pop out much more, the atmosphere is thicker, And rather than fading out at the end, there's a violin solo, followed by an instrumental shift where the bass is brought to the forefront. It sounds so bold and funky. I neglected to mention this earlier, but this album is a whopping 2 hours and 11 minutes across just 14 songs. It is double-disced. The first one ends with Melody, whose mixing isn't as cramped as the original, and in general is more bittersweet. The chorus is still insanely infectious, however. ZUTTO kills it on the vocals. You don't need me to tell you that at this point. At this point, I can come back around to YURAMEKI in the Air. It starts with about a minute of ambient wind. It sounds like a light breeze. This version, by the way, is 16 minutes long, so keep that in mind. Once again, comparing the production to the studio version, this one seems to be more subdued, though it is still deep as the dickens, with these bass lines you could dive into for God's sake. According to iTunes, this is about tied with Night Cruising as my most played song on here, at 40 times, a lot more impressive considering its duration. Now, I've come this far without bringing it up, but there is a very important element to this album's context I have to talk about. After this performance, Motegi and Sato planned on continuing with the band. Less than 3 months later, tragically, Shinji Sato passed away at 33 from, quote, heart problems he had since birth. This concert would end up being their swan song. Keep in mind, it's not entirely known if Sato knew that he wasn't long for this world. However, if it is the case and he was aware that the end was near, it makes a lot about Otakatachi no Wakure that much more poignant. On the final song on the second disc and concluding track to the entire set, Fishmans performed the entirety of Long Season. Actually, more than the entirety, this version lasts for 41.5 minutes. It's very powerful and impressive considering that they are able to pull off a version that one-ups the original in the first place. The violin part towards the very end, the electric guitar solo, the various instances of accordions, all of it has such a different context placed at the end of not just a wondrous LP, but really an entire career. The cherry on top, if you will. And with that, Otakatachi no Wakare comes to a close. It would be released as their third live album 6 months after Shinji Sato's death. Kashiwabara began a band called Polaris and released 6 albums, the most recent one actually coming out this year. Motegi would join Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra as their drummer, and the band would frequently unite to play concerts throughout the 2000s. Hanzi, collaborator with the Fishmans and keyboardist on December 28th, would lose her battle with cancer and pass away in 2006. Besides that, they have continued to gain popularity overseas in the US with the help of sites like rateyourmusic.com, which is how I found out about them. And many of their albums would become available for streaming on Spotify, making it easier than ever for me to fling them at my friends like a monkey throwing its poo, if the poo was actually pure beauty in musical form. Thank you for watching this all the way through. If you are at all interested in the Fishmans' music, you will most likely find them with a Google search, but I have put links in the description for convenience sake. I would call this the finale of Season 3, but Davis and I still have a couple videos we're working on, although they will probably take a decent amount of time. Lord knows this one did. Be sure to check out thetobedecited.com and the channel's Instagram, @thetobedecited, for unused footage and or previews of new videos. 2018 has been one heck of a year, and this is almost certainly the last time I'll talk to you during it. There is something you can look forward to in the immediate future. That's Yoshi2.mp4, which I'm going to make a yearly thing now. Yeah, video's over. How long is it anyways? Oh my god, I'm lightheaded from talking that much. Alright, we're done. We're done. Done.